Last year, Qantas notched up a $2.8 billion loss. Now, this was the worst in Australian aviation history. A decade earlier, you might remember, it was a completely different scenario. After the Ansett collapse, Qantas had almost total control of the domestic market. So what happened? Matt O'Sullivan has spent the past 7 years covering the aviation industry for Fairfax newspapers. Now, he's the author of a new book. It's called Mayday, How Warring Egos Forced Qantas Off Course, and he joins me now. Welcome to The Drum.
Thank you very much, Julia.
I have to ask you, first of all, about your subtitle, How Warring Egos Forced Qantas Off Course. Now, we talk a lot about the external factors, the problems within the industry, from unions to the price of oil to the carbon tax. How much of what Qantas went through is a consequence of these warring egos, as you put it?
A great degree. I mean, it's a fight from the very beginning between Alan Joyce and John Borghetti, and this is a fight that's been going on for 10 years. I mean, we had a situation where Alan Joyce became chief executive of Jetstar, the inaugural CEO of Jetstar back in 2003. John Borghetti was placed as the overarching boss of the Qantas Premium brand. And so you had this sort of competitive tension between these two parts of the Qantas group. And that continued. The two of them ran for the top job. Obviously, Alan Joyce got it in 2008. And John Borghetti subsequently left the airline. But he went on to become the chief executive of Virgin Australia. And the two were back scrapping.
Fierce rival. So what do you think if the choice had been made the other way? What would a Borghetti-run Qantas have looked like today?
Well, in many ways, I think it would be very much the way you see Virgin Australia today. I mean, John Borghetti is very much about brand. He created the brand that we saw with Qantas back before he left it. He was responsible for things like the first class lounge, for making that brand what it is.
You described him as a walking brand, I think.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he loves brand. I mean, you just got to look at the guy, the cufflinks he wears, the essence of what he is. He is style written large.
So you're saying successfully so?
Yes, successfully so, yeah.
And Alan Joyce did not talk to you for your book, but you had a lot of sources who did speak to you.
Well, Alan Joyce wouldn't talk to me for the book. I mean, this was his prerogative. That's fine. But bear in mind, I've been covering aviation for the last 7 years, so I had many times to chat to him, to interview him.
Of course. Now, you decided to write this book at the time of the grounding in 2011. What was it about that, and what did you find out about how that decision was made and if it was the right one?
Well, I just remember turning up to the AGM in 2011, and everything was very strange. They had brought in a big security presence, police everywhere. I felt like the security presence was greater than what it would have been at Sydney Airport, and they had bussed us, the journalists from the AGM where that was conducted, around to a press conference about 50 metres away. Very strange. Now, out of that AGM, the next day, Alan Joyce woke up and decided to ground the airline. And so, I mean, this stayed with me, and I wanted to know what actually happened within Qantas during that time.
And what did you find?
Well, I found, I mean, I guess the main thing that I uncovered was that 2 weeks before the actual grounding, Qantas came very close to grounding the airline.
So, yes,
I just want to ask about Alan Joyce, because if you go back to that time and subsequent, the year later or whatever, and Qantas shares and Qantas itself looked like it was, in a very dire situation. Alan Joyce now is seen as a little bit of a hero because they've turned around the books, the share price. It's not just oil price, it was happening before the oil price dropped. So tell us what you found out about Alan Joyce. I mean, what makes the man tick? Right. And do you need to be a little bit crazy to run an airline?
You definitely need to be crazy. Alan Joyce, I mean, in many ways, he's Mr. Teflon. I mean, this guy, this Irishman who came to Australia in 1996 and worked for Ansett to start, is a fighter, and I have to take my hat off to him. He is someone who will fight, will stay the distance, and I mean, at the end of the day, as much as John Borghetti at Virgin, he wants to see Qantas succeed. I mean, his legacy rests on this. In the last year, you've seen a massive turnaround. You know, some credit has to rest with Alan Joyce. He's stripped out costs, but by the same token, he's also finally sort of declared an end to the 65% line in the sand strategy. And you can't forget that oil prices have halved. And while Qantas hasn't sort of felt the full benefit of that yet due to the hedging policy, that will obviously sort of flow through into the second half. So, I mean, those two are the factors, the ceasefire in the domestic market with Virgin and the decline in the oil price have also been fantastic headwinds for Alan Joyce and Qantas.
He's got a genius for personal survival, hasn't he? Because there might be a turnaround now, but you know, he's been associated with some pretty substantial failures.
Well, failures in what sense?
In terms of the ventures into Asia that he was criticised for?
Well, I mean, you might remember back in 2011 we had Red Q. I mean, this was a ultra-premium airline they intended to set up in Singapore. What happened to that? Nothing. Sorry.
Matt, I was just going to ask, you know, from the point of view of Australians generally, those that use the airlines, most importantly those that work for them, what are the scenarios that are possible in the Virgin Qantas competition as we go into the future? What are the sort of what outlook can we have for our airline industry here in Australia at the moment, given the forces that we've got there now?
Well, I think it's almost a return to the days of Qantas Ansett. You know, you're going to have a situation where Virgin continues to eat away to some extent at Qantas's grip on the premium end of the market. You've got to remember this is where they make the most of their money. That's the domestic market is the lion's share of earnings for both Qantas and Virgin. So it's almost a case of the two of them are nursing their wounds. They're returning to a bit of normality, a bit more sense has flowed into the market.